Historically, Fort Lauderdale is not the place where anyone different would have moved. People were much more likely, if they had an unusual background, to move to Miami or to Tampa.
She liked Lauderdale. She never had any problems with that. She would never have thought of living anywhere else, I don't think.
When Grandma came to Fort Lauderdale, there were no other Hispanics at all. There was a prominent architect here named Abreu who left town shortly afterwards. But I think my grandmother was the first permanent resident of Fort Lauderdale who was Spanish, and maybe the first Cuban resident at all.
She was born and lived in Holguin, which is a smaller town, I should say, than Havana. She lived a very nice life there. She loved it. But she said she always wanted to come to the States, so she was only too happy to come here to boarding school. Then she went to pharmacy school in Louisville, and that's where she met my father. They ended up here because he started moving down, getting jobs closer and closer to Cuba. So by the time they were married, he was living in Miami, and then moved up here to Fort Lauderdale.
The people who came in the 20s and 30s, they came with the notion that they were novelties and that they should fit in as quickly as possible. So she was very patriotic and very conscious of doing things the American way. I'm sure she was still very foreign to anybody who knew her. She spoke with an accent, but she was very educated. So I think it allowed her to warm up to the people in what was then a very southern town.
She was an extrovert. She had no trouble making friends with people. She already spoke English because she'd been to boarding school in Kentucky. And she loved it here. She was used to being in an area where no one around her spoke Spanish. And she went back maybe every year or two to Cuba, so that was good enough, I think.
It was at least 10 years before another Spanish family came to Fort Lauderdale. There were a handful of Spanish speakers who had lived in Spanish countries who were Americans, but there was no one who was really fluent in both languages like Grandma was. She wrote open letters for the newspapers to publish in Spanish, and she acted as the host for visiting officers from the Army or from the Navy who came through the port.
In the early days, if a ship came in that was all Spanish and they needed someone to help with translation, she would do that kind of thing. I think she was just about the only Spanish person in town they knew to come to.
Now, of course, 30% of Broward County's population is Hispanic, so my grandmother was always the strongest person in the family, so she was a very take-charge person. She was a person who was pretty advanced for her time. She was very intelligent, very well educated, and was still, in a lot of ways, very Spanish in her style, and she didn't lose that.